Ladies and gentlemen, Amish Tripathi.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Now, I've been invited here to speak on the topic of inclusiveness and why it's important. Before I begin my speech, I thought maybe I'll just ask a few of you, why do you think inclusiveness is important? I believe the subject has been discussed today already, right? So why do some of you think inclusiveness is important? Why is it important? Or is it just one of those things to just discuss and debate about? Anyone has any points? Why is inclusiveness important at all? All sections of society come together. That's a nice global aim. Good point. Louder, louder, sorry. Stability. Very good point. It's in your own enlightened selfish interest that you have inclusiveness in your society. There have been societies that have grown rich, but inequality was high. Let me give you the example of South American countries. It's difficult to imagine it now. Till around 4-5 decades ago, the countries in South America were compared to East Asia, what is seen as East Asia today, the way we see East Asia today. South Korea, Hong Kong, these countries are now a part of the developed world. They're going to be richer than Europe. These kind of sentiments and statements were made about countries like Argentina and Brazil 50 years ago. It was believed that Argentina was soon going to be richer than Europe, than many countries in Europe. Where is Argentina today? It's one of the problems with inequality. Inequality beyond a limit leads to divisive and confrontational politics, which is what happened in many South American countries, which actually ends up destroying society itself and even therefore hurting those who are doing well in that society. So it's in your own selfish interest, your own enlightened selfish interest, that there shouldn't be too much inequality in your society. Good points all. Now, of course, if inequality has to be handled, there is one present paradigm to handle inequality, which for the want of a better term, I'll call the Western paradigm. How does this paradigm work? How it works is you look at the rich people and you guilt trip them. That's one part of it, that you guilt trip the rich people. So, for example, most of you in this room would be among the better off people in India. And the idea would be to guilt trip all of you. You have to do this because it's your duty, etc., etc., etc. The second part of this model is you'll have an intermediary. Could be an NGO, could be an institution. Often they would be multinational NGOs, multinational institutions. And on the third leg of this paradigm are the recipients of the charity. And the entire philosophical approach to the recipients is that it is your right to receive this charity. No one's doing you a favor by giving you charity. It is, in fact, your right. This is the modern paradigm that exists for inclusiveness. What are the downsides of a paradigm like this? There are interesting reports that I've read of many places where NGOs do exist in large numbers. So, for example, in places like Africa or in India, where the recipients are becoming charity addicts, where they get used to receiving charity all the time and don't actually come out of that approach. And whenever the charity stops, they start getting agitated and angry and leads to social chaos. You have a problem with the donors as well, because they're normally, very often, not always, but very often, they do charity to try and get over the public impression of guilt. So they like to do charity which is PRable. Correct? Charity karo, photo newspaper mein dalo. Correct? Because that will help them manage their image, their impression. What does this do? Often charity goes to causes which are PRable, not those which your local society actually needs. And the third is, of course, the NGO industry. Very often, even the NGOs don't end up helping the society that they actually want to help. There is the example of a mining industry, which was, I won't give the exact name. There was an example of a mining company that was blocked from mining in Odisha. It turned out that the NGO which was leading the agitation was itself funded by a mining company in the US. So what agenda was being pursued can be debated. This is the Western paradigm, and I want to put another paradigm in front of you. The Indian paradigm, the ancient Indian paradigm to charity. And I want to put this paradigm in front of you, and perhaps this is something that we could think about. What is the ancient Indian approach to charity? In the traditional way in India, and I'll speak from the philosophies of the two dominant philosophical approaches in India today. One is the Indic approach, the approach of Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism. And the second is the Indian Islamic approach. These are the two main philosophical approaches in India today. What is the Indic approach to charity? It is believed that the person who's giving the charity and the person who's receiving the charity, the recipient of the charity is actually doing a favor to the person who's giving charity. This is the Indian karmic approach. What is the logic of this? All of you know the logic of karma, right? That we carry our own karma. All the good or bad deeds that we do impact us in this life or the next. If you want to know what your past karma was like, look at your life today, because it's the consequence of all your past karma. And you want to know what your future will be like, look at your karma today. You're creating your future now. This is the traditional Indic approach. So the belief was the recipient of charity is actually doing you a favor, because he's taking a debt on his own karma for your sake. Because he's carrying a debt on his karma, which he will have to pay back sometime in life, either in this life or the next. And the giver of charity is cleansing his karma. He's repaying some debt. This was the approach to charity in the Indic way. In the Indian Islamic way, there is a concept of zakat. I don't know if there are any Indian Muslims among you. Any Indian Muslims among you guys? Yeah, you guys know the concept of zakat. I don't know if it's practiced outside of India, but I know in India it's practiced. I have many Bori Muslim friends. A percentage of your income has to be given to charity. You can either do it directly or through any institution, through your Sufi shrine, through your mosque. And this is your duty to God. You're not doing anyone a favor by doing this. This is the Indian approach, the Indian Islamic approach. What are the benefits of following this kind of approach as compared to the Western paradigm, where you guilt trip a rich guy and tell a poor person that it's his right to receive charity? In the Indian approach, what are the benefits of this? And here's the thought I want to leave with you. And this is something that has been followed in India for centuries before the British time came in. Think of the impact on the recipient of the charity, the person who's receiving the charity. And I'll tell you my own personal story in this. I come from a very humble family, and my family was middle class, and middle class in the earlier Indian sense, not the middle class of today. In the middle class of the 70s and 80s, which is when I grew up, if you weren't starving, you were middle class. Okay? And that was the kind of family atmosphere that I grew up in. My grandfather was of very, very limited means. Okay? He didn't even have the money to feed himself, let alone educate himself. There was this man called Madan Mohan Malviya ji. How many of you guys have heard of Madan Mohan Malviya? Awesome. Delighted that you have. He was the founder of Banaras Hindu University. He also used to run a charity program where if he found children who did not have parents but who were very talented, he would actually fund their education. One of the children who benefited from that charity was my grandfather. He was a very, very smart man, my grandfather. Very poor, of course, but very, very smart man. And because of Madan Mohan Malviya ji's charity, my grandfather rose dramatically in life. And he became a teacher. He became a Pandit in Kashi. In those days, families used to be big, right? Not like today. So he had 8 children. So today, there are at least around 150 people who have emerged from my grandfather. And all of us, we know our life has changed because of Madan Mohan Malviya ji's charity. All of us would have been dirt poor today if it wasn't for him. But what is the attitude of all of us to that charity? We don't think it was our right to receive that from Madan Mohan Malviya ji. We think he did us a favor. We think that we have taken a debt on our soul by taking that charity, and it's our duty to repay that debt by doing charity to others, not necessarily to Madan Mohan Malviya ji's family. Okay. Malviya ji probably didn't even know that all of us existed, because it wasn't that he was doing charity specifically for my grandfather. He was just running a charity program, right? Think of the attitude that exists in our family today. We know that we've taken a debt on our soul. We must do charity to repay that debt. If all donors, if all recipients of charity can have this kind of attitude, you will encourage them to get out of poverty. The only person who can pull you out of poverty is you yourself. Others can only just help you. So this is a difference, a philosophical difference that comes in when the recipient believes that he is taking a debt on his soul by taking charity from someone. Think of the difference that happens in the philosophical life of the donor in this approach, in the Indic approach, in the Indian approach of charity. He doesn't think that he is this great man who's doing, great man or great woman, who's doing charity to others. Look how great I am, do some PR activity. That's not the approach of a donor in the Indian way. A donor in the Indian way will know that actually he's cleansing his karma by giving charity. Someone who's receiving that charity is doing him a favor. His entire approach will be different. He'll not be thinking about how PRable this charity is. He'll actually use his own mind to figure out, because I need to do this for the good of my karma, I better make sure my charity is put to good use. So he or she, I must emphasize he or she will not just write a check. He'll give something far more valuable, his time and his expertise, to make sure that that charity is used well, that it actually helps someone's life, not just something which will go on a newspaper report. And think of the impact on the intermediaries. One of the beliefs in the ancient Indian way is the intermediaries should be local, ideally. You shouldn't have too many people who have no idea about the local scenario, which is why in the traditional Indian way, much of the conduit for charity were temples. How many of you guys are Punjabis? Oh, good North Indian contingent. You have that langar concept, right? Where you actually feed anyone who comes, and it's a great deed of charity, and there's seva, which all the rich people, all the well-off people do. This was a concept that existed in all temples across India till a few centuries ago. What is called prasad today was actually feeding of the poor. It was actual food that was given to everyone who came. Ancient temples in India used to run the educational institutions. They would educate everyone locally, and they would educate them in local skills that can be used locally. Sadly, what's happened post-British times is the government has taken over most temples in India. We all know what happens when the government takes over something. It's a good way to, the Indian Parliament, as I've been told, is that fantastic institution where you can go in with a duck and come out with a hen, and you won't even know how the change happened. So, when temples were taken over by the government, many of these old functions that temples used to run started dying out. It's the benefit of intermediaries actually being local. They actually know what works in that area. They're not someone who've come from the West or come from some other city with a savior complex, because they usually don't know what the local people actually want. And this is the model that I want to suggest. This is our own model to charity, to inclusiveness, which will actually probably work much better for our own country than the Western model that we have imported right now. If we can actually get some thought into our approach to charity, we can actually start finally following what Vidur advised us in the Mahabharata. Everyone knows who Vidur is, right? Okay. Vidur was in the Mahabharata, one of the longest sections is this section called Vidur Niti. And Vidur had said in that there are two ways to waste money. One is by giving money to the unworthy. That is a surefire way to waste money. The second way to waste money is by not giving it to the worthy. So you have to do charity, but you have to make sure it goes to the right person. And this is the traditional Indian approach to charity. This is the model that I want to leave in front of you guys to think about. There's a wealth of wisdom in the traditional Indian way. We should try and utilize it. It should not just be restricted to the books. We must apply it in our lives, and we'll find that it works much better for our own country, rather than imported Western paradigms. And that's a thought that I want to leave with you. I've been told that after a short speech, I'm going to have a question and answer session, so I am open for that. Thank you.
All right. I see that the FT Perspectives app is buzzing with questions.
Okay.
But first, let me ask you that...
Am I supposed to retweet that FT Perspective app?
I need to ask Juicer, why didn't we tell him this before? All day we would have just had followers and followers. But yeah, we'll let you do that right after this. But I'm just curious, especially since your entire talk was, to me, something I'd never known. You know, some of the things that you talked about here.
Yeah, go.
It really reflected that India has always had a tradition of being inclusive.
Yes.
But somewhere along the way, we've probably lost our way about what we do today. I mean, it's you mentioned a sense of superficiality that has kicked in, but most importantly, how we probably have forgotten that we've done this all our history, and now we have very little to do with it.
Right.
So take us through that.
In fact, actually, the way to approach, our entire governance paradigm in traditional India was quite different. There's this writer called Dharampal. I would encourage all of you to read his books. He writes of what India was like before the British took over. And he's based it on British records. He scoured through them in the UK. And the entire Indian governance paradigm was actually locally driven. Mm-hmm. The central governments in India, right down to the Mughal Maratha times, never took away more than 10%, at max 12-13% of total income. That was the central tax rate. We cry about 35-40% today. The central tax rate before the British came was 10-12%. That's it. That's all that the central government took away. Most of your taxes and your contributions were all local. They were in local hands, and most people actually gave it voluntarily locally to manage all communal assets locally. So your local hospitals, your local schools, most schools were either run out of temples or madrasas. Your local granaries to protect against famines, all of that was run locally and driven through charity. That was our traditional approach. This approach of a central government driving everything actually emerged only in the British times. Sadly, we've carried on with that paradigm till today.
Yeah.
We are not the kind of country which can be driven completely from the top. We are 1.25 billion people. We are more of a continent than a country. We are also very rebellious people. We are not really the kind of people who are compliant and listen to what our bosses usually tell us to do.
Is that how you were?
Yeah, that's how I was. That's how most of us are. So even when we say yes, no one can be sure are we saying yes or no. We'll do what we want to do. We are that kind of country. We are a rebellious country.
Yeah.
A decentralized approach, a much more local management approach, where we function our own charities by ourselves locally, is actually the traditional Indian way, and it's worked well for us for millennia.
But then why is it, you talk about this traditional Indian way. Someone would ask, especially as you delve into history and then see what's happening around you, we're obsessed with Western ideas, right? We want them lifted and planted here, literally as if they were like pots and they could have just been imported into the country. Yet we are not a country that likes to give. I mean, if you look at philanthropy today, Warren Buffett is surprised that when he comes to India, that there is a little bit of twitching in the chair by all our top billionaires, but it takes them not too much of time for Bill Gates and them, and even Buffett to say that they're actually pledging half their wealth to a certain disease or whatever. Why do you think that's it? Is this a mindset issue, or is the money too new to us? Do we want to hang on to it? What is it?
Look, the reality is, despite all the charity by American billionaires, inequality in America is far worse than in India. The Gini coefficient is far, far higher in India. And higher means worse.
Yeah. But we
but
also
perhaps,
shouldn't look in, we should look at internally and see where we can get better.
But perhaps, I think maybe money is a little too recent in India. And I think often, like I said, we've actually forgotten many of our old ways. I'm not anti-West. There are a lot of good things we can learn from the West. But one of the traditional things that we had in India was we were a self-reliant people. We are not believers in some Mai Baap Sarkar coming and sorting things out for us.
We're
That's not the traditional Indian way. What we have had in the last few centuries is completely antithetical to the traditional Indian way. Perhaps we need to relearn that a little bit.
Right.
We still have a few snitches of it still alive. Like, let me give you an example of how we are not traditionally compliant. I mean, everyone knows there was a Beijing Olympics, right, recently in China.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this just to kind of, I'm not saying China is bad, India is good. It's just a different way of life. When the Beijing Olympics happened, China decided that they have to impress foreigners when they came, right? And it being China, when the government decides, they implement it, So they had their stadiums ready a lot before the games actually began. Unlike in India, where the Commonwealth Games, I believe, they were painting the stadiums as the games were still going on. But for the Chinese government, just that wasn't enough. They wanted the Beijing citizens to be impressive for the foreigners when they came. So they actually came out with a guideline for Beijing citizens. I'm not joking, seriously.
That does sound like a joke, though, yes.
No, seriously, they actually did. Guideline that Beijing citizens had to follow. So what should be the length of a handshake? It was prescribed, it had to be 3 seconds. Because less than 3 seconds is not friendly, and more than 3 seconds is creepy. So it had to be exactly 3 seconds. They came out with dress guidelines for the Beijing citizens. Again, I'm not joking. And depending on the age of the woman, length of skirt was prescribed. For men, it was prescribed that you cannot combine white socks with black shoes for some reason. God knows why. Okay, so what do you think the Beijing citizens did when the government came out with this guideline?
Probably followed it.
They followed it.
Yeah.
The government came out with a guideline, you'd follow it. Imagine if a government in India had come out with a guideline like this. तुमने बोला सफेद मुझे और काले जूते नहीं पहनो, मैं साल भर पहनूंगा, भाड़ में जाओ. That would be the Indian attitude.
So we know which side of the tolerance debate you are on.
We still have that bit of rebelliousness in us. It's the Indian way of life. My only submission is let's revive our way of life completely. Be true to who we are. We are essentially a self-reliant, rebellious people. That's what we should be.
Okay, let's take this discussion of inclusivity beyond just individual-led inclusion. Let's talk about what you see is sort of, that divide that somebody started talking about in terms of terminology, India versus Bharat, right? I think it started about a good 10 years ago. And even now, there seems to be, these are two different worlds. Not just in terms of pace of growth, but in terms of just cultural integration and truly taking the story of what India is in the urban landscape, or even in terms of growth, jobs or economic growth, so on, into rural India. Outside of course, smartphones where you can check Facebook. But I'm just saying that beyond that, how are we trying to bridge that gap?
Frankly, we are not, and our governance fails us here. Our entire governance structure is designed towards harassment of the common citizen. One of the guidelines in the Chanakya Niti, which I think should be a guideline for at least the Indian governance model, was that the model should be such that you trust the citizens completely, but the government should not trust its own employees. You trust the citizens completely, but don't trust your own government employees. That's the model Chanakya prescribed. The present Indian model is the exact opposite. You don't trust the citizens at all, but you trust your own employees, which is why we have to do stupid things like signed affidavits, get it stamped by a SEM. We know he's not checking anything in that document. Because our entire governance model is based on the colonial model, where the Goras in the government can be trusted, and the brown-skinned guys, citizens, cannot be trusted. We've just inherited that same model, just replaced the Goras with Bada Sahibs. That's all that we've done. Our entire governance model is designed in such a way. Now, urban guys know how to somehow manage the system. Rural guys don't.
So this managing the system...
And that is the real problem. The rural guys suffer because of this. Yeah. They suffer terribly.
You give the example of Chanakya, and there are several scriptures that talk about, including the Bhagavad Gita at some level, about this idea of managing the system. There is always a right way and a wrong way. That's what's been typically wondered. But in India, there's always a middle way. And that could be your way, my way, the highway, or any other way. So the problem is that we seem to make that nebulous route the norm. Why is it? Is it a mentality issue in our country? Is it because we've learned to fix things, or as somebody famously wrote a bestseller called Jugaad, and that's also sort of really, people are inquisitive. Where does one stop that? Can Jugaad become the symbol of inclusion in India? I mean, is that really the way we would like to approach it? And if so, it's clearly not going to have longevity, right?
I think, look, because the system doesn't work, we try and figure our own way out. And I think the best way to explain this is to give you an example. This was a long time back, so before the new Mumbai airport terminal came up. And I was returning from an international flight, and I came out of the aircraft into the the aero bridge, walked up to the gate, and then there was a board out there: Hajj passengers go left, and that was it. That was the only board out there. And there was a European in front of me, and he saw that, and he was thoroughly confused because he's not a Hajj passenger, so he doesn't know what to do. Does he take a right or a left? Now, we are Indians. We are used to the government not working. We are used to the government being a headache rather than a solution provider.
And to bad communication.
Yeah, so we asked around, we figured out a way, and then we had to turn right basically. And we figured out a way and we turned right. The European was used to a system that works, and he was paralyzed. He was actually standing there thoroughly confused. He didn't know what to do. And I actually went and told him, yeah, just take a right. Just follow us. Yeah. Are you sure? No, just follow us. Just trust me. Now, this is just one example. We Indians have got used to a model where the government simply doesn't work. And this is the way it has been since colonial times. It's not that the government worked in those days as well. In fact, economically, the period from 1800 to 1947 was the worst in human history for India. Now, you can have a debate on whether this is a source of comparative advantage or disadvantage. Often if you grow up in a society that is completely well structured, you're simply not
creative enough.
Yeah, creative enough.
Because
you're not challenged.
Some other level somewhere.
But perhaps you can say that this is a comparative advantage as well, that the government is so badly run, that we learn to figure out our own approach.
Yeah. So that's where, we have, of course, the government. It's a bit like that boxing ring with a punching bag. But the question is, there are some aspects in our country that have to be led by the public sector, certainly the government. Our social quotient is poor. Poverty index is one piece. But look at gender inequality. I mean, look at education levels, women's safety. I mean, I think, outside of Bombay, there are few places women can actually feel a little comfortable in. The emphasis has to come from the top. You have done a lot of research that a lot of emphasis on gender equality and education, etc., has been in the historic scriptures. How have we just suddenly lost our way on them? Because clearly, somewhere in our history, these things were given prime importance. Today, there are some edges of the growth story, not quite the centerpiece.
Yeah, it's on the issue of women. You're absolutely right. We've lost our way completely. In ancient India, women were respected greatly. In fact, one example that I can give you is in ancient times, the highest status was of rishis. Their status was even higher than kings. They were sort of, not exactly, but sort of equivalent to the prophets and messiahs of the Abrahamic faiths. In the Rig Veda, there are 30 hymns that have been written by rishikas, women rishis. So there are idiots today who say women can't read the scriptures. They wrote the scriptures 4,000-5,000 years ago. That was the status of women in those days. I think in many places we've lost our way. That's okay, that happens. We've had a bad few centuries.
Yeah.
But till as late as 1700 AD, or Common Era, India was still 24% of the world's GDP. A lot of innovation used to come from here. We've had a bad 200, 300 years. That can happen to anyone. We just need to revive our way once again.
Right. But the question then is, how? Because if you say that, we all finding our own creative ways to find success, find solutions, and so on, when will we see the government actually putting might behind these issues? As somebody said, if we can figure out our social indicators, the growth will come as a consequence. We are chasing growth and hoping all of that will solve the social problems. Is that the wrong end of the stick?
Look, I'm not sure in the traditional Indian way the government can solve things. So even the issue of women's oppression or caste or many of those issues, it's not that the government is oppressing women in the last 60 years or the government is causing caste oppression. It's a societal issue. So we have to handle it ourselves. And India works best when we figure out our own solutions. The best thing that the government can do is actually just step out of the way. Let us find our own solutions. If they can go back to the same model that we had till the British took over, which is take only 10-12% taxes, reduce the government imprint as much as you can. I'm sure all of you would love 12% tax. And focus the government on a few things that only the government can do. External security, internal security, the monopoly of violence, only the government can do that. Support in infrastructure. And 10-12% might be, I guess, I admit, a little too idealistic, but essentially reduce taxes and reduce the functions of the government and leave the rest to the people. We will find our way. That's the model India has had for thousands of years. It's a model that will work for us.
As a young leader yourself, do you think...
Yeah, I'm 41. I'm not that young, yeah.
I think these people, if they're told that 41 is not that young, they'll be getting up and going anytime. Well, let's talk about, I would say, young leaders who see themselves sort of being part of the nation building process. How important is social inclusion? Because people have been wondering, and we've been reading about this whole, fight of the civilizations kind of stories, that if we do not fix inequality, if we do not bring, let's say, issues of safety, education onto the front page, we are going to see social unrest at some point in the country. Could we be headed that way? We've seen it in parts of China. I mean, China is already threatened by this. Could India face the same?
Fortunately, India is democracy. And it's a huge positive that we have. And I know there are many, I know I used to hear this even in my banking days. There are many who look at China with, who used to look at China with jealousy. Arey, we should be like them, and just ram reforms down. I know democracy makes things a lot slower for us, but democracy is a safety valve. It ensures that, the checks and balances of the system will ensure that we have to take everyone along. Our politicians, you have to hand it to them. It's not easy running a country like India. But they have to somehow, get votes from as many people as possible, many of them with vastly competing interests. So they are forced to find some middle ground. So democracy is the biggest asset that we have as a country to make sure that we never lose our way to such an extent that we end up having social chaos.
You just mentioned that the days that you were a banker, right? Tell us a little bit about those days. How did you view capitalism differently and how do you see it now, especially when you've gone back to this philosophical history and gone through the scriptures? And is Amish the capitalist even existent today? Besides, of course, the money you make on your books.
The only ism that I believe in is pragmatism. You have to do what works. One thing which I certainly am not is a socialist. Because socialism is wonderful in theory. It has almost never worked in practice. I've yet to come across any case study of any country that has reduced poverty and created social cohesion through socialism. But capitalism has its flaws as well. So how do you use capitalism to generate wealth and yet find those balancing factors so that you don't have such inequality that you create social chaos? You have to find that balance. I believe many of those philosophies are there in the Indian way.
Anyway, okay. A lot of these people are big fans of yours, and we read the kind of numbers that your book has done. 5 years ago, this kind of an audiovisual may not have existed because not too many people really wanted to publish your book in the first place. How was it taking rejection? What was it like? People get rejected all the time, right? But what was it like as being a person from the finance world, writing your book, and then constantly being told, sorry, we're not going to publish this? Did that harden you?
I was in the life insurance industry. How many of you guys sell life insurance? Okay, if everyone, not just mutual funds. You know what rejection is like if you sell life insurance. So your own wife would not want to hear about your life insurance plans. So it's like this. I mean, rejection is a part of life. Yes, my first book, Immortals of Meluha, was rejected by every publisher it was sent to. The key thing is not about how many times you fall. It's about how many times you get up once again and keep walking. That's one of the things I learned with my book. I finally self-published my first book.
Yeah.
God's grace, it did well.
Therefore, the most obvious question is that why have you chosen a publisher when you enjoy the fruits of self-publishing at the first go?
Collections is a big headache in India. So anyone who's been in the collection side knows that. So that's one of the main benefits that a publisher brings in. You don't have to chase retailers for money.
Right.
And of course, distribution. In India, distribution is a big headache. So there is value in having a publisher. But I'm, of course, deeply involved in marketing and in the...
Yes, we saw that a little while ago. So has it been easier selling books or insurance?
What do you think, yeah?
I can say lucrative definitely.
There's this American film director called Woody Allen.
Of course.
So he'd said there are things worse than death. Have you ever spent an evening with a life insurance guy? So that was, yes, that was the industry I was in.
Fabulous. Okay, as you know, some of these questions that I've been asking have been coming through the FT Perspectives app. There's another one that's come in. The reason I want to take it is because it's so relevant to where we are today. We were just talking about this whole issue of women. We at one level are discussing artificial intelligence and the power of WhatsApp and economic growth and so on. And on the other hand, we say women should not be allowed to enter temples. You can't wear jeans and walk into a temple or whatever not, right? These dichotomies of India are great for writing, but they can be really harsh realities. And they are certainly ruining India's image as an appropriate superpower which has had such a vibrant history.
No, more than the image, I don't really care about the image. It's more about the reality. So I'm a strong believer that everyone should be allowed into temples. In terms of education, when we're talking about backward classes not being allowed, once again in Dharmpal's book, it's been he also studied. One of his books is called The Beautiful Tree, which speaks about how education was like before the British took over. And he covered, and this based on British records, and schools that existed across the Madras Presidency and the Bengal Presidency. And interestingly, they even had caste compositions of the school. Majority of the students were actually backward castes in the Pathshalas, the Hindu-run schools. In the madrasas, there's a common belief that women aren't allowed in Islam. In madrasas, you actually had a large number of women students. I'm talking about before the British came. We had many of these good practices. We've lost a lot of it. Once again, I'm not being anti-West, and I'm not one of those people who say we have to blame the British for everything. I mean, look, I mean, they've been gone for 70 years.
Yeah.
So we have to run our own country ourselves. And we have to find solutions to our problems. And in that sense, perhaps I believe that what's happening today, in terms of making sure that anyone can be allowed to enter temples, or mosques, or churches, is a good thing.
Right.
Anyone should be allowed to perform priestly duties if they choose to. It's a good thing. We should have these reform movements.
Right. So
And it's best if these reform movements are driven by society rather than the courts intervening, because then it goes into a thing of, fairness, unfairness. You're interfering in this community, not that community. Let society drive these reforms.
some more questions are coming through, and one of them is that what is the hardest thing about being an author? That question is only with me, not there.
Okay. What is the hardest thing about being an author? No, it's a good life, man. I mean, I have no complaints here. So I actually get to do what I like to do. I actually get paid for it. The books that I always bought a lot of books, but now the books that I buy it goes as research. It's tax deductible now. I save taxes on it. Thank you, Indian government. So there are actually a lot of privileges here being an author. I like the job.
And we were just discussing problems of startups. We didn't know authors were that lucky. Startups are still finding a way to get rid of taxation. Well, one of the other questions that's coming through is really, when you became successful, did you actually participate in all that charity we're talking about? Do you give away to charity?
My wife and I, we do a lot.
What kind of
and
charities
I must say my wife is a much better person than I am. So she commits a lot more. She runs a children's book publishing company also, by the way. So it's not that she does nothing. But both of us, we don't talk about it publicly too much, because that's not the way one should do charity. And I think what I love most about what my wife does, she more than me, is that it's not just about writing a check. It's about committing time and effort. Money is not the only kind of charity that is done in the Indian way. It's not only about dhan dan. It's also about gyan dan. It's about shram dan. You give your labor for something, and we try our best to do as much as we can from our means. And I think the most important thing is, even with our kid, we try and make sure that he is also aware of how lucky he is. I grew up in an atmosphere where we saw that, look, we weren't that well off. My son is a lot luckier. So on his birthday, on various special days, we take him along to orphanages that we go to, so he can see how lucky he is. That's the only way that you can get that the sense of compassion in. The only point, though, I try to make in my speech is that just compassion is not enough. You need compassion and wisdom as well to figure out where to help, how will it be most effective, because you should not be driven by what is PRable. You should be driven by what will actually earn you good karma. It's selfish interest in a way, but selfish interest in a more useful perspective.
Got it. Well, this is a very interesting question. Are you a political person? And do you have a take on the way the country is run today?
I'm an Indian, yeah, so all of us Indians are political, but I never comment on politics publicly.
Is this going to be a first time?
No, I've never done it. There are enough people who comment enough on politics, all at 9 p.m. every night. Some of them comment so loudly that you can hear them even if you switch your TV set off. So my suggestion is you should listen to them, yeah, not me.
So clearly you have a view on the media. Do you think the media in some ways is misconstruing what might be the situation on the ground in the country? Do you think they have more power than they deserve in the current context?
Look, the key problem is this. It's very easy to blame the media too. But one has to understand how complicated a country we are. There are more people in India than all of North America and South America put together. And media and Twitter generation, because of the nature of the medium, tries to simplify everything. And there are many people in the media who've spent most of their life only in Lutyens, Delhi or South Mumbai. Most of them are frankly more at home in London than in, say, Jabalpur. So obviously they judge from their perspective. But India has 1 million perspectives, 1.25 billion people. So it's very easy to blame the media. I wouldn't, do that. My only thing is that even the media and everyone needs to realize we are only one of millions and millions of perspectives in India. We're a very complicated country. There are more people in India than North America and South America put together. We're an extremely complex country. It's very difficult to come down with simple, pat narratives for us. It's not that easy.
Yeah. Okay, the final question really is, what is the one thought that you'd like to leave everyone here with? Could be a view on social challenges in the country, or just sort of a personal learning in life.
I think what I'd like to say is, look, it's very easy to get lost in, in the inclusion conversation and start thinking of money itself as bad. That someone who's a capitalist is by his very nature evil, and that is not the Indian way. And the thought that I want to leave with you guys is that in the traditional Indian way, to have a successful life, you had this concept called the Purushartha. Purush actually does not mean male, okay? That's the translation that's actually come into force today. It wasn't the translation of Purush, thousands of years ago. It was how to have meaning in your life, anyone, male or female. And the concept was that you have to have balance in 4 aspects of your life to have a successful this life, for your next life or for moksha. Those 4 aspects were, the first was dharma. Dharma is erroneously translated as religion often. It's actually not. It's about the right way to live. The second is artha, which again is just translated as money. It's not just money. It's about money, wealth, power, fame, everything. The third is kama, which actually is all the sensual pleasures of life. Music, dance, everything. And the fourth is moksha. And for a successful life, you need to have balance in both, in all 4. So which means it's good to earn money. There's nothing wrong with that. But you must earn money the dharmic way, without doing anything wrong, without breaking any laws. Make sure you give as much money away as you can, and realize that it's your own benefit to do that. Enjoy all the sensual pleasures of life, music, dance, everything. Don't get lost in it though. Find balance in all 4, then you'll find moksha. That's the Indian way. Don't swing on any extreme.
That's a good one to close this discussion with Amish Tripathi then. Amish, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much for joining us here. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. I think every single discussion that we've had at FT Perspectives has left people with new ideas. Whether it was about social inclusion and discussing dharma to moksha with Amish Tripathi, or considering food as manufacturing with Mr. Gopalakrishnan. Earlier in the day, we had Mr. M.J. Akbar tickling your right-wing bones, and then we had Raghav Bail adding some economic perspective. But a standing ovation for Amish Tripathi to put a closure on what has been a successful FT Perspectives. We do look forward to all of you joining us next year for another one of these sessions, a conversation with thought leaders. Thanks again. Thank you.